Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the A segment of episode 77 of Codename Kids Next Door, Operation C.A.R.A.M.E.L. We begin this segment in Guatemala, and we see that Heinrich Von Marzipan has escaped from the Kids Next Door Arctic base prison. Heinrich is using bags of sugar to create a circle to perform a ritual of some kind. Shortly after the segment begins, Number 5 makes her presence known to Heinrich and comments about how it's been 5 years since they've last been in Guatemala, and 5 years since the last time Heinrich performed this ritual. Number 5 questions if Heinrich still hasn't learned his lesson yet, but Heinrich responds that he's performing the ritual because he's figured out how to reclaim what he lost, or he says something along those lines at least. Number 5 is pleased to hear this, and she's happy to help Heinrich when Heinrich requests help with one of the bags of sugar. Unfortunately, Number 5 doesn't realize that Heinrich has tricked her. Heinrich performs the ritual, and Number 5 is affected by this ritual. The next scene takes us to the Sector U treehouse, and the 4 other Sector V operatives arrive in a 2x4 technology flying vehicle. Number 2 is nervous about being in the Sector U treehouse because the distress signal that they received warned them to stay away from the treehouse. Number 1 responds that that's all the more reason to suspect that something is up. Number 1 also grumbles about how Number 5 is off on one of her candy hunting exploits. Shortly after Number 1, Number 2, Number 3, and Number 4 arrive at the Sector U treehouse, a girl enters the room that they're in. This girl is rather clumsy and has an awkward speech pattern. Some of the Sector V operatives call her a dork and say that she's clumsier than Number 13. This girl is also holding a bag full of caramels, or caramels if you prefer. I'll be sticking with the caramel pronunciation from here on out. But in any case, the girl offers one of the caramel pieces to Number 3, but Number 3 doesn't want it because it was just on the ground. The girl tries to, give any of the 4 of them the caramel piece and tries to insist that it's important that they take the caramel piece, that any of them take the caramel piece. The girl comments along the lines about how there isn't much time left. But suddenly, Number 1, Number 2, Number 3, and Number 4 are pinned to the wall by candy canes. Heinrich von Marzipan makes his presence known to them, and Heinrich reveals that this clumsy girl is Number 5. The 4 other Sector V operatives are surprised to hear this, and they question what Heinrich did to Number 5. Heinrich just comments about how he took the quality that Number 5 is most proud of, her coolness, and then he eats a caramel piece. Heinrich also grumbles about how Number 5 had saved the Sector U operatives from the fate that happened to her, but Heinrich considers the presence of the 4 other Sector V operatives to more than make up for this. The 4 other Sector V operatives do manage to break free from the candy canes, and they try to fight back against Heinrich. After this brief fight, Heinrich makes a comment along the lines about how he notices how proud Number 1 is of his status as leader, and questions how it will taste. Number 1 doesn't understand what Heinrich is talking about, but suddenly the ritual that happened to Number 5, the ritual that affected Number 5 at the beginning of this segment occurs in the Sector U treehouse, so the 4 other Sector V operatives are affected by this ritual, and after the ritual has been performed, the 4 other Sector V operatives besides Number 5 now look different from their usual selves, and there's now several caramel pieces in front of them. Number 1 while Heinrich samples each caramel piece, Heinrich samples one caramel piece in front of each of the 4 other Sector V operatives, and he comments about a quality, the quality that they are most proud of. So number 1 now is wearing a suit, and he's acting rather indecisive and nervous. And Heinrich comments about how the caramel pieces in front of number 1 has his status as a leader involved in them. Or yes, Heinrich says that the caramel pieces in front of number 1 embody how proud he is of his status as leader. Number 2 now looks like a Neanderthal, and Heinrich comments about how the caramel pieces in front of number 2 embody his intelligence. Number 3 now looks like an emo, and Heinrich comments about how the caramel pieces in front of her embody her cheerfulness. And then number 4 now has a timid and meek demeanor, and Heinrich comments about how the caramel pieces in front of number 4 embody his ferocity. The 4 other Sector V operatives still don't fully understand what's going on, so Heinrich decides to reveal the specifics to them, and us, the viewers, by extension. Heinrich reveals that on the 5th night of the 5th month of every 5 years, it's possible to perform a ritual using bags of sugar to create golden caramels. And according to Heinrich, these golden caramels are supposed to be exceptionally delicious, but their creation comes with a price. Someone affected by this ritual to create the golden caramel pieces must give up the quality that they are most proud of, like we saw with and we saw what happened to the Sector V operatives when they were affected by the ritual. Heinrich, however, reveals that he doesn't plan to perform this ritual just in the Sector U treehouse. Heinrich reveals that he's created a giant circle with the smaller circles. Yes, we've seen that there's a circle around the Sector U treehouse when the ritual was performed, but Heinrich reveals that he's created these circles with bags of sugar. Yes, Heinrich says he's used bags of sugar to create these circles not just at the Sector U treehouse, but other treehouses too. And all of these tree houses are connected with a bigger circle. So there's a bigger circle these smaller circles for each of these tree houses create a bigger circle. And Heinrich intends to create more of these golden caramels using the qualities that other Kids Next Door operatives are most proud of. And Heinrich decides to head off to the next tree house that forms this circle. Number 1, though, points out that Heinrich wasn't affected by the ritual just now. Heinrich, in a sad tone, reveals that this is because Heinrich was already affected by the ritual a long time ago. Heinrich already lost the quality that he is most proud of. But then Heinrich quickly regains his composure and bids the Sector V operatives farewell while he leaves in his candy-themed helicopter. What Heinrich doesn't realize, however, is that number 5 managed to hitch a ride on the helicopter before he could fly off. So number 5 is heading off to the next treehouse that forms this circle with Heinrich. And the 4 other Sector V operatives try to figure out what to do next. So next up, we head to the treehouse that's next in the circle. And the Kids Next Door operatives in this treehouse are affected by the ritual. Heinrich arrives, and he tries one of the caramel pieces that was formed, but he's distracted by... while Heinrich is distracted eating one of the caramel pieces, he finds that the newly created caramel pieces and the bag of the other caramel pieces that he gathered so far are gone now. He then sees number 5 trying to climb up a ladder, and Heinrich tries to chase after number 5, but he's momentarily distracted when the 4 other Sector V operatives arrive, but without the qualities that they're most proud of, they end up crashing the 2x4 technology vehicle into the treehouse rather than it having a smooth landing. So Yes, the crash landing of the 4 other Sector V operatives end up distracting Heinrich momentarily. Unfortunately, the distraction still doesn't stop Heinrich from reaching number 5. He eventually reaches number 5, and he manages to reclaim the caramel bag from number 5. He pulls out one of the caramel pieces, and he says that this is the last caramel piece that embodies number 5's coolness. And he says once he's eaten it, number 5 will be trapped in her current state. And Heinrich claims that number 5 has only herself to blame. He goes on a rant about how number 5 didn't stop him from eating all of the caramel pieces that embodied the quality he is most proud of, because, yes, Heinrich says that he's trapped in his current form. But number 5 then reveals to Heinrich he didn't eat all of those caramel pieces. Number 5 then reveals that she has a necklace, and at the end of this necklace is a caramel piece. Heinrich realizes this is the caramel piece, the last caramel piece that embodies the quality he is most proud of. Number 5 explains that she didn't give Heinrich this last caramel piece back then because she knew that Heinrich would just eat it and thus would lose any chance of reclaiming his original self. But Heinrich doesn't believe number 5. He claims the caramel piece, or he takes the caramel piece from number 5 and insists that number 5 didn't care enough to help him undo the ritual's effects on him. But number 5 number 5 then responds to Heinrich that she's trying to tell him how to undo the ritual's effects on him. He just has to willingly share his candy with number 5. And that's why number 5 has been holding onto this caramel piece all these years. She wanted to make sure that Heinrich had learned his lesson about sharing his candy. Heinrich, though, still doesn't believe number 5, and he's starting to become tempted to eat this last caramel piece. But number 5 manages to stop Heinrich long enough and tells Heinrich, just share your candy. Number 5 tells Heinrich just has to share his candy with her, and the ritual's effects will be undone. Heinrich will be his original self again. Heinrich, though, yells at number 5 that he can't trust her, or he questions number 5 why he should trust her. Number 5 responds that Heinrich is more important to her than candy. Heinrich, though, starts to break down in tears. He comments about how he used to be so beautiful, and number 5 assures Heinrich he can be again. He just has to share that last caramel piece. Heinrich looks at the last caramel piece, and after a moment of silence, he hands over the caramel piece to number 5, and it looks like the ritual's effects have been undone. But the scene then quickly changes to show that the Kids Next Door operatives that were affected by the ritual's effects have been returned to normal now. So we see the operatives of the treehouse that they're in right now, and the other Sector V operatives, all of the Sector V operatives and the operatives of the treehouse they're in right now, they're back to their usual selves. And they do comment about how they gave a heads up to the other operatives of the other treehouses that were in this giant circle. They tell the operatives of those other tree houses about how to undo the ritual's effects. Just share your caramel pieces with others. And then, but after clarifying that they have informed the others how to undo the ritual's effect, the 4 other Sector V operatives meet. They actually see someone else, or number 2 questions number 5 about a friend of hers that seemingly has just arrived. This friend of number 5's looks like a female version of Heinrich, and her name is Henrietta Von Marzipan. And number 5 explains that Henrietta is an old friend of hers. Henrietta admits that she needs to right the wrongs that she has performed, and she bids the Sector V operatives farewell before leaving in the candy-themed helicopter. Number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4... number 1, number 2, and number 3, pardon me. Number 1, number 2, and number 3 realize that Henrietta is Heinrich's true form. Heinrich was actually originally a girl named Henrietta, and she has returned to her true self now. Number 4, though, doesn't immediately figure out that Henrietta is Heinrich, or that Heinrich is Henrietta. And so the segment ends with number 1 clarifying for number 4 that Heinrich and Henrietta are one and the same. And number 4 is surprised to hear this. And yes, that's how we end this segment. So there you go. This is the last A segment for Codename Kids Next Door, and it's also the last entry of the Heinrich Von Marzipan Saga, which has finally received proper closure. We finally find out the specifics of Guatemala, of the Guatemala incident. Yes, we figure out the specifics of the Guatemala incident and find out that Heinrich von Marzipan was actually Henrietta von Marzipan originally. The ritual that created the golden caramel pieces like it was explained in the segment, these golden caramel pieces are created by taking a quality that one is most proud of and turning them into these caramel pieces, or these caramel pieces embody the quality that one is most proud of. And, well, we find out what Henrietta was most proud of, and that's why she became Heinrich. So that was definitely a big surprise for many. Many viewers were definitely surprised to find out that Heinrich is really Henrietta. And Tom Warburton has acknowledged on one of his blog posts that when they first created the character of Heinrich von Marzipan, they hadn't figured out the revelation that Heinrich was really Henrietta. That wasn't a detail that they decided on until much later on. It does go to show, it's another example of how Codename Kids Next Door can embody the improvised method of storytelling, or to use the analogy that George R.R. Martin mentioned in a quote, the Gardner approach, not having all the details figured out right away, but they come up over the course of telling a story. That was the deal with Heinrich von Marzipan. The truth about him being Henrietta wasn't planned until much later on compared to when the character was first created. And so we do get to see the end of the Heinrich von Marzipan saga. And yes, Heinrich, or Henrietta, has finally learned her lesson. Throughout all the other entries of this saga, Heinrich, aka Henrietta, was shown to have a major flaw of not really sharing candy. That was the main flaw of the character. And it finally took till the end of this saga, but Henrietta has finally learned her lesson about sharing her candy, and she does intend to undo the wrongs that she has done. So, yes, you could say that Henrietta, or Heinrich, is a notable example of a character in the show who has redeemed themselves. Yes, we've seen characters in the show that are on the side of the good guys, but flawed. We've seen some villains, and we've seen some anti-heroes and anti-villains, or morally ambiguous characters, if you will. But Heinrich, or Henrietta von Marzipan, is a notable character who started off on the side of the antagonists, but then had redeemed themselves. Yes, Henrietta was first introduced as an antagonist, but now she has redeemed herself. We have seen another example on the opposite side, where a good character becoming bad, with Chad Dixon, aka number 274, starting off as a good guy, but then Chad started off as an ally of the heroes, but now has become one of their greatest adversaries. Chad is one of the main villains of the series. Henrietta was the opposite. Henrietta was introduced as number 5's archenemy, or at least one of number 5's archenemies, but now she has redeemed herself, and she does intend to right the wrongs that she has performed throughout the course of the series, and maybe even before the series began. So some fans are definitely curious if Henrietta might appear in the sequel series or the spin-off series, provided that the sequel or spin-off series ever does get greenlit. And I think that might be a good idea. It would be a good idea to show us more of Henrietta's character, especially now that she's reformed, and that, yes, it's pretty much safe to say that Henrietta's demeanor as Heinrich in the other entries of the saga were probably her bitterness over Heinrich, aka Henrietta, had blamed number 5 for the ritual affecting her the way it did, and yes, you could attribute Heinrich, aka Henrietta's bitterness or her demeanor to be bitterness towards the perceived crime that number 5, or for what she blamed number 5 for. Yes, so we can probably assume that if Henrietta were to appear again, we'd probably have a better idea of her true character, or at least closer to her true character, but also with the lesson about, but also having learned the lesson about sharing candy with others. So I would definitely be in favor of Henrietta returning in the sequel or spin-off series if it ever does get greenlit. So fingers crossed that that sequel or spin-off series does see the light of day eventually. And I guess another detail, it's kind of a side detail, not directly affected to the segment, but yes, the whole C.A.R.A.M.E.L versus C.A.R.A.M.E.L. The segment and other entries in Codename Kids Next Door use the C.A.R.A.M.E.L pronunciation, while I've used the C.A.R.A.M.E.L pronunciation, and other people have called the candy C.A.R.A.M.E.L too, or they use the C.A.R.A.M.E.L pronunciation. And yeah, that's kind of caused a debate for some people, but for anyone who's curious about that, the C.A.R.A.M.E.L versus C.A.R.A.M.E.L pronunciation actually relates to certain types of dialect dropping extra syllables. Or yeah, sometimes there are some dialects where a syllable is dropped from certain words. So it's not just C.A.R.A.M.E.L versus C.A.R.A.M.E.L. Other examples I can think of would include separate versus separate, and camera versus camera. So the whole C.A.R.A.M.E.L versus C.A.R.A.M.E.L situation is kind of similar to that. And I know some people have debated about that because C.A.R.A.M.E.L can also be a word for something else not relating to the candy, and insist that C.A.R.A.M.E.L, it's wrong to say C.A.R.A.M.E.L for the candy. But like I said, this is more of a case of different dialects having different pronunciations for certain words, and this ties back into a point I've tried to make in other videos, that language isn't a black and white concept where there's only ever one right answer, or you can have certain words that can have multiple right answers for spelling or pronunciation. Yes, language isn't black and white, but it's not a black and white concept. It's a concept full of shades of gray. It's a concept that changes and adapts with time and location. That's a point I've tried to make before, but so I disagree with some people who try to impose a black and white concept view of language. So yeah, C.A.R.A.M.E.L versus C.A.R.A.M.E.L is pretty much a dialect situation, just to clarify for anyone who's curious, and it's really up to personal preference. Like, at least where I'm from, we use the C.A.R.A.M.E.L pronunciation more often than not. So that's just a little a by the way tangent that sort of relates to this segment that I thought was worth bringing up all the same. But otherwise, yeah, there we go. So yes, this entry concludes the Heinrich Von Marzipan Saga. Heinrich finally learns the lesson about sharing candy, and we find out that Heinrich was really Henrietta von Marzipan. So, like I said, I would be interested in seeing Henrietta von Marzipan return in a yes, Heinrich is really Henrietta, and I would be interested in seeing Henrietta return in the sequel series or the spin-off series if it ever does get greenlit. But yeah, I do think that it was nice that they were able to give this saga proper closure, and how one of number 5's arch enemies has become an ally to number 5, the opposite of what happened to number 274, starting off being an ally but then becoming an adversary. So there we go for now. So as of this video, we've now discussed the A segment of episode 77 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel. Take care, and until next time.